Okinawa, spring 1945. The air, heavy with the stench of gunpowder and salt, clung to the tattered kimonos of women hiding in a damp makeshift tunnel. Among them was Hana, barely 18, her eyes reflecting years of unspeakable trauma, clutching a tiny carved wooden bird, her last link to a stolen childhood. The bird was smooth, worn from countless touches, its tiny wings spread as if perpetually in flight, a cruel mockery of her own rooted existence. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced the gloom, illuminating the drawn faces of the other women, their gazes fixed on nothing, yet seeing everything. Each breath was a shallow, painful exercise, a testament to a life force relentlessly diminished. Hana could feel the vibration of distant artillery in her bones, a rhythmic, terrifying drumbeat signaling the approach of an inevitable, unknown future. The world outside was tearing itself apart, and their small, confined universe mirrored its devastation. For countless moons, Hana and hundreds like her had been nothing but objects, their bodies currency in a war waged by men. They had been comfort women, a euphemism for systematic sexual enslavement. Stripped of dignity, identity, and the very essence of self, they braced for the inevitable, a fate they believed all victors would impose. They knew the stories, whispered in the dark corners of their prison. Conquerors always took what they wanted. It was the law of war, harsh and unyielding. They anticipated further violence, further humiliation, perhaps even death, for the gaijin, the foreign devils, were painted as barbaric without honor or restraint. This was their grim inheritance, a future etched in the horrors of their past. But when the American devils finally arrived, what unfolded was an act so profoundly alien, so utterly human, it would forever challenge everything they thought they knew about war and about themselves. It would shatter the hardened shell of their indoctrinated despair, planting a seed of possibility they hadn't dared to dream. Imagine being stripped of your dignity, your identity, your very self, only to be met by the enemy with an act of grace you couldn't comprehend. What moment in history, or in your own life, has defied your darkest expectations? Tell us in the comments. Major Kenjiro Sato, a stern-faced officer of the Imperial Japanese Army, stood on a rise overlooking the comfort station that housed Hana and dozens of other women. The makeshift complex, nestled amongst crumbling farmhouses, was a necessary evil in his eyes, a stark, utilitarian solution to a complex problem. Sato, a fervent believer in Imperial Japan's divine mission and the Bushido Code, viewed the comfort women as a pragmatic necessity, a means to maintain troop morale and prevent disorder among the soldiers. He saw them not as individuals, but as a collective sacrifice, an unfortunate but essential component of the war effort. His jaw was perpetually clenched, his gaze sharp and unyielding, reflecting years of unquestioning loyalty to the Emperor and the greater glory of the Empire. He was a man forged in the crucible of absolute duty, where personal empathy was a dangerous luxury. His belief system was unshakable. Sato genuinely believed that superior Japanese spiritual and military discipline meant their troops would remain pure, untainted by the moral decay he ascribed to their enemies. He was taught, and he believed, that the barbaric Allied forces, especially the Americans, would pillage and exploit without restraint, their lack of true honor leading them to acts of unimaginable depravity. The systematic sexual slavery under his command, therefore, was viewed not as a crime, but as a controlled, albeit harsh, aspect of war. It was designed, in his twisted logic, to protect pure Japanese women at home from the inevitable desires of soldiers and to prevent wider chaos within the ranks. It was a grim but essential order, a sacrifice on a smaller scale to maintain a greater, more crucial one. The women to him were merely instruments, their suffering justified by the larger national objective. He often repeated to himself and to his subordinates that they were doing what was necessary, that these women were making their own contribution, however unpleasant. It was a cruel deception, a moral void dressed in the garb of duty. The distant guttural roar of American dive bombers punctuated the humid Okinawan air, shaking the ground and rattling the women's fragile sense of safety within the compound. The acrid smell of burning sugarcane fields, perpetually ablaze from strategic bombings and desperate Japanese tactics, hung heavy in the air, a constant, sickening perfume of impending doom. It was a sensory foreshadowing, a prelude to the relentless American advance that crept closer each day. Sato's constant vigilance was palpable. His hand often rested on the hilt of his katana, the cool steel a familiar comfort. He was ready to die for the emperor, but the prospect of defeat and the unknown fate it would bring simmered beneath his composed exterior. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, a silent promise of the clash that was now unavoidable. He harbored no illusions about what the Gaijin would do when they finally breached their lines. He expected them to be exactly as he had been taught, merciless, savage, and without honor. The village fell in a swift, brutal assault. The roar of battle, once distant, now enveloped the comfort station. Explosions rocked the earth, sending plumes of dust and debris into the sky. Amidst the cries of combat and the confusion of retreat, Hana and a group of comfort women were discovered, huddled in their usual hiding place by a patrol of battle-hardened Marines. Their fear was absolute, a cold knot in their stomachs, their bodies rigid with the expectation of the inevitable. They squeezed their eyes shut, bracing for the curses, the blows, the endless degradation. Their collective breath hitched, awaiting the moment their worst fears would be confirmed. But then, a different kind of figure stepped forward. Not a grim-faced soldier with a rifle, but a soft-spoken man with eyes that held both sorrow and unwavering conviction. Chaplain Daniel Hayes, accompanied by his medical aide, Corporal Leo Rodriguez. Hayes, a man of God in a uniform, held not a weapon but a tattered Bible and a dented canteen. His approach was cautious, his movements deliberate, devoid of aggression. He spoke in broken Japanese, stumbling over the syllables but his intent clear, his voice calm amidst the lingering echoes of gunfire. He offered not demands but clean water, extending the canteen with an open palm. And then, he performed an act so unexpected, so utterly disarming that it froze the women in their terror. He gave a small, almost reverent bow. He and Rodriguez immediately began attending to the wounded, both Japanese soldiers and civilians, found in the chaos with equal unbiased care. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their hands gentle as they administered first aid, offering what little they had. Hana and the other women were paralyzed, a profound cognitive dissonance taking hold. They had been taught their entire lives that the Gaijin would be beasts, worse than anything they had known. Every tale, every propaganda leaflet, every cruel experience had reinforced this image of the enemy. Instead, they received water, medical aid, and a gaze free of lust or cruelty, a gaze that held pity, not contempt. The sheer unexpectedness of the act left them in a state of bewildered, trembling disbelief. Their minds struggled to reconcile the reality before them with years of indoctrination, years of trauma that had taught them to expect only the worst. Some wept silently, tears of confusion and a nascent, terrifying hope, while others simply stared, their eyes wide and unblinking, trying to fathom the impossible kindness. It was the first time in so long that they had been seen, truly seen, as human beings. Historians estimate that between 50,000 and 200,000 women, primarily from Korea, China, and Southeast Asia, but also including Japanese women, were forced into sexual servitude by the Imperial Japanese Army, a testament to the horrific scale of this atrocity. The systemic nature of their suffering was designed to erase their humanity, to turn them into nameless, faceless resources. From a post-war affidavit by a former comfort woman, we were told the Americans would be beasts, worse than anything we had known, that they would defile us further, mock our plight. But when they came, the men with the crosses, they looked at us like we were human beings. There was no scorn, no hunger in their eyes, only a deep sadness. It was the first time in years anyone had looked at us with such simple, unburdened respect. Chaplain Hayes and Corporal Rodriguez, with the grudging approval of a tactical commander overwhelmed by the number of displaced civilians, set up a makeshift clinic in a partially destroyed building on the edge of the liberated village. It was a precarious operation, constantly under the threat of stray fire and the lingering dangers of a war zone. Yet they dedicated themselves to it with an almost monastic devotion. They prioritized the most vulnerable, and among them were the comfort women, their faces etched with a silent, enduring pain. They offered what little food and medical supplies they had, treating festering wounds, offering quinine for fevers, and distributing clean water with a painstaking fairness that defied the chaotic reality around them. Hayes, observing the women's profound psychological wounds, the vacant stares, the sudden flinches at loud noises, the way they huddled together as if for protection from an invisible threat, understood that their physical ailments were only a fraction of their suffering. He didn't preach fire and brimstone. He didn't demand conversion. Instead, he quietly began to pray. He would kneel beside Hana and other women, not touching, never invasive, but simply being present. His words were a soft, murmuring balm, spoken in English, a language she didn't understand, yet somehow the intent translated. The rhythm of his voice, the solemnity of his posture, the genuine concern in his eyes, these spoke a universal language of empathy. Despite strict military protocols and the inherent dangers of operating on the front lines, chaplains often functioned under exceptional directives, allowing them greater autonomy in humanitarian efforts than regular combat personnel. They were often the spiritual and moral compass of a unit, and sometimes, as in Hayes's case, extended that role to the civilian population caught in the crossfire. In 1945, there were approximately 8,000 chaplains serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, representing various faiths, a vital but often understated force for moral integrity amidst the brutal realities of war. Their role was a unique blend of spiritual guidance, moral support, and often, practical humanitarian aid. An excerpt from Chaplain Hayes's journal, scrawled in a tiny water-stained notebook, "The suffering here is beyond words. Today, I prayed with a young woman whose eyes held the emptiness of 1,000 years. She was like a ghost, tethered to a body that had endured too much. I offered nothing but a prayer and a promise that God sees her, that she is not forgotten, and that she is worthy of peace. I don't know if she understood the words, but her trembling eased, even if just for a moment. It is a slow, agonizing process, this healing, but one we must undertake." The other comfort women, initially wary, their distrust a hard-won shield against a cruel world, began to tentatively approach the chaplains, not for physical comfort at first, but for the quiet presence, the gentle words, the simple act of being acknowledged as a person. They sat on the periphery, watching, listening. Hana, though still guarded, felt a warmth she hadn't known in years, a fragile tendril of hope beginning to unfurl within her numbed spirit. It was like a forgotten muscle slowly reawakening, a painful but necessary sensation. She watched Hayes, how he treated every person, regardless of their background, with the same quiet dignity. It was an anomaly in a world that had taught her only degradation. As days bled into weeks, a fragile routine formed around the makeshift clinic. Hayes and Rodriguez remained, their unwavering presence a stark contrast to the transient brutality of war. They began teaching rudimentary English words for basic needs and safety: water, food, safe, thank you. It was a painstaking process, often communicated through gestures and infinitely patient repetitions. One sweltering afternoon, Hayes found Hana sketching delicate, intricate flowers on a piece of discarded American rations paper, using a charred stick. The drawings were surprisingly vibrant, a testament to an inner world she had managed to protect. He didn't dismiss it as trivial, didn't chastise her for wasting resources. Instead, he produced a small, well-worn sketchbook and a blunt pencil from his own pack, items he considered essential for his own reflections, and gently placed them beside her. It was a silent invitation, a profound acknowledgement of her inner humanity, a call to find beauty again in a world that had tried to extinguish it. He knelt beside her, pointing to the flowers, and simply said, "Beautiful." Post-war analyses revealed the devastating physical toll exacted upon comfort women. Many suffered from severe, untreated STDs, up to 80–90% in some camps, a staggering figure that highlighted the systemic medical neglect, and chronic physical ailments, alongside profound psychological trauma. Tuberculosis, malnutrition, and unaddressed injuries were common. These statistics underscore the urgent need for comprehensive medical and psychological care, which was almost universally lacking during their captivity and often overlooked in the immediate aftermath. Their bodies, like their spirits, were broken, and their suffering was compounded by shame and the societal stigma that followed them. A U.S. Army medical report, marked confidential and filed weeks later, detailed the health crisis among discovered civilian populations in Okinawa. Beyond acute physical wounds from combat, the psychological state of many female civilians, particularly those identified as comfort women, is dire. Symptoms consistent with severe trauma, including catatonia, extreme anxiety, and self-harm ideation, are prevalent. Mental health support and humane treatment, not just medical, are paramount for any hope of rehabilitation and reintegration. The wounds are not just on the skin, but deep within the soul. The gift of the sketchbook, and Hayes' simple word, broke through Hana's final, brittle barriers. It was a recognition that she was more than just a body, more than just a victim. She began to trust, tentatively at first, sharing small details of her past, of a life before, of lost dreams of becoming a textile artist. Her voice, long silent, began to murmur. Other women, seeing her slow transformation, the gradual return of a flicker of light in her eyes, the slightly less hunched posture, started to hope for their own healing. They found solace in shared stories, in the quiet, consistent decency of the chaplains, and in the nascent community forming among them. The clinic became not just a place for physical healing, but a sanctuary for their battered souls, a tiny island of peace in a turbulent sea of war. Word of the chaplain's unconventional efforts reached higher command, filtering through the ranks, sometimes with skepticism, sometimes with reluctant admiration. A platoon of American MPs, tasked with maintaining order and processing civilians, initially viewed the comfort women with suspicion, struggling to reconcile their ingrained prejudices with the chaplain's compassionate approach. They had been told to be wary, that these women might be spies, or simply a drain on resources, and they viewed the chaplain's actions with skepticism. It wasn't standard operating procedure to befriend former captives, let alone those who had served the enemy in such a morally ambiguous capacity. However, witnessing Hayes' unwavering resolve and the palpable, positive change in the women's demeanor, the way they gradually began to shed their shell of fear, their willingness to cooperate with the medics, the MP's initial cynicism slowly gave way to grudging respect, and then quiet protection. They began to stand guard more diligently, ensuring the women's safety, even offering small gestures of kindness, like sharing cigarettes or extra rations. The U.S. military's official stance on comfort women was often ambiguous or underreported during the war, reflecting a complex interplay of intelligence gathering, cultural misunderstanding, and prioritization of combat operations. The sheer brutality and systemic nature of the Japanese military's comfort system was often not fully grasped or officially acknowledged by Allied forces during the heat of battle. However, many individual soldiers, especially chaplains who often possessed a broader humanitarian mandate, often acted based on personal moral compasses and the dictates of their faith, transcending the rigid confines of military strategy. Their actions were a testament to individual conscience overriding institutional blind spots. A censored letter, penned by an American soldier, Private Miller, to his sister back home, managed to slip through the censors. "Things here are strange, Susie. Our chaplain, Hayes, he spends his days with Japanese women, praying with them, caring for them. Not what you'd expect, not what they told us these women were. He says it's about saving souls, not just winning battles. And you know those women, they look at him different, like he's a ghost of kindness they never thought they'd see. It makes you think, makes you really think about what we're fighting for." The letter captured the essence of the subtle but profound shift occurring. Hana, emboldened by her growing trust and her renewed sense of self-worth, began to subtly mediate between the women and the MPs. She translated not just words, but intentions, bridging the cultural chasm. She explained the women's fears, their needs, their hopes, using the fledgling English she'd learned and her intimate understanding of Japanese customs. Her growing confidence and the visible transformation of the other comfort women served as a silent, powerful testament to the profound impact of the chaplain's approach. It fostered an unlikely bridge of understanding, demonstrating that humanity could transcend the boundaries of nationality and wartime enmity. The Americans began to see them not as enemy women, but as fellow human beings who had suffered terribly. Days after the village fell, Major Sato, having narrowly escaped the initial American advance, was captured during a desperate, disorganized Japanese counterattack near the very village where Hayes and Rodriguez were working. He was brought in, injured and defiant, his uniform torn, his face streaked with dirt and blood, to the temporary holding area, a hastily erected tent only a stone's throw from the makeshift clinic where the comfort women now found a fragile sanctuary. He had expected summary execution, or at least brutal interrogation. He had mentally prepared for it. But the indignity of his capture, the collapse of his world, gnawed at him. As he was roughly, but not cruelly, tended to by an American medic, his eyes fell upon an impossible sight. Chaplain Hayes, the enemy he had demonized, the man whose compatriots he had taught his soldiers to despise, was not only tending to his own wounded soldiers, but was quietly offering solace to the Japanese comfort women. He saw Hayes kneeling, his head bowed, his hands gently holding another woman's emaciated hand, murmuring words of comfort in English. The women, who Sato had dismissed as mere instruments, were looking at Hayes with something akin to reverence, their faces softened by an unfamiliar peace. Sato's rigid worldview, built on years of propaganda and military doctrine, cracked. He expected Hayes to gloat, to humiliate him, to parade the women as proof of Japanese shame, or perhaps even to order the women to exact revenge upon their former tormentor. The thought of their vengeance, however justified, was a bitter pill. Instead, Hayes approached Sato, not with condemnation, not with a triumphant sneer, but with a simple medical kit and an offer of clean water. He spoke in surprisingly fluent, though accented Japanese, his voice calm, direct, and utterly devoid of malice. "Are you well, soldier?" Hayes asked, his eyes meeting Sato's, holding a profound, unsettling compassion. The unexpected mercy from his enemy, directed even at him, a man who had sanctioned such atrocities, was a revelation that tore through Sato's carefully constructed beliefs about Allied barbarity and the inferiority of their moral code. The tables had turned, not in revenge as he anticipated, but in an act of profound, unexpected grace. It wasn't the vengeance he had braced for, but a perplexing kindness that bewildered him far more than any torture could have. This enemy, this American chaplain, was treating him, a captured enemy officer, and the women he had exploited, with the same fundamental human dignity. It forced Sato to confront the vast, horrifying chasm between his nation's propaganda and the reality before his eyes. The demonized foe was acting with a humanity that shamed his own actions, shattering the very foundation of his belief system. He found himself, for the first time in decades, truly lost. The narrative now descends into the profound psychological scars carried by the comfort women. Their stories, once fragmented whispers, began to emerge in the relative safety of the clinic. The systematic dehumanization they had endured had led to a complete loss of self, a pervasive sense of worthlessness that permeated every aspect of their being. Many suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, manifesting as vivid nightmares, debilitating anxiety, and an almost pathological inability to trust. Their physical bodies, though slowly healing, remained a constant reminder of their ordeal, etched with the memory of violation. They struggled with chronic depression, some retreating into almost catatonic states, others prone to sudden, uncontrollable outbursts of grief or rage. The fear of being touched, of even being looked at directly, was deeply ingrained. Their sense of identity had been so thoroughly eroded that many struggled to even remember who they were before their capture. Chaplains Hayes and Rodriguez walked an ethical tightrope daily. They navigated the labyrinthine military bureaucracy, often facing resistance or outright disapproval for their fraternizing with enemy civilians, particularly women with such a sensitive and controversial background. There was the constant threat of reprimand, of being reassigned, of having their mission curtailed. Yet they pressed on, driven by a conviction that transcended military orders. The emotional toll of witnessing such profound and widespread suffering was immense. The weight of their pastoral duties in such a horrific environment was a heavy burden. They often spoke late into the night, wrestling with the moral ambiguities of war, the human capacity for cruelty, and their unwavering belief in the power of redemption. They questioned, they doubted, but they never abandoned their charge. Their courage was not of the battlefield, but of the soul. It was the immense courage required to extend unconditional compassion in a war zone where dehumanization was not just a side effect, but often a deliberate, strategic tool. The very systems that created the comfort women were designed to break spirits, to render individuals into commodities. The chaplains, through their simple acts of decency, provided a moral counterpoint to these prevailing atrocities. They reaffirmed the inherent worth of each woman, a revolutionary act in a world that had denied it. Their actions went beyond mere charity. They were a profound act of moral witness, a declaration that even in the darkest corners of human experience, light could persist. The story weaves in detailed descriptions of the women's internal struggles, their dreams haunted by the past, the way they flinched from shadows, their slow, painful journey toward reclaiming their voices, their agency, their very sense of self. It was a process catalyzed by the chaplains' unwavering respect, their consistent belief in the women's inherent humanity, the documented lifelong psychological and physical consequences for comfort women, including chronic depression, reproductive health issues due to untreated infections, and severe social ostracization in their home countries, are stark reminders of the depth of their suffering. These grim statistics are brought into sharp focus by contrasting them with the immediate, tangible outcomes of the chaplain's intervention. While not a cure-all, their presence led to a discernible reduction in acute anxiety among the women, tentative verbalizations of their trauma to trusted caregivers, and crucially, the first steps toward building community and trust among the survivors. This humanized the statistics, demonstrating how even small, consistent acts of compassion and respect could initiate a profound healing process, one that would impact these individuals for the rest of their lives. It was not merely physical survival, but the survival of the spirit that the chaplains fostered. The relative calm of the refugee camp was shattered by a sudden, desperate Japanese suicide attack. A ragged, fanatical unit, bypassed by the main American advance, had launched a surprise assault, targeting the camp. They believed it to be a key American staging point, a vital hub to disrupt before their final glorious sacrifice. Chaos erupted. Shouts of alarm, the crackle of rifle fire, and the dull thud of mortar rounds ripped through the air. American soldiers, caught off guard, scrambled to defend the area, forming defensive perimeters amidst the pandemonium. But the comfort women, having endured years of captivity and systematic trauma, were in extreme peril. Their fragile sense of safety brutally shattered once more. Panic seized them. They scattered, crying out, some attempting to hide, others simply freezing in terror, their past horrors returning with terrifying immediacy. Chaplain Hayes and Corporal Rodriguez, without a moment's hesitation, refused to abandon them. They plunged into the chaos, herding women towards what little cover was available, shouting reassurances in their broken Japanese, their voices cutting through the cacophony of battle. They shielded the women with their own bodies, embodying their commitment to their moral and spiritual duty even under direct fire. Hayes moved with an almost ethereal calm, his eyes scanning for danger, his hands guiding the terrified women. Rodriguez, a former medic, pulled several wounded women to safety, improvising bandages and staunching bleeding while bullets whizzed past. Their actions were a stark, visceral testament to their selfless courage, their unwavering belief in the sanctity of human life. In the midst of the mayhem, Hana, who had huddled behind an overturned cart, saw Hayes and Rodriguez risking their lives for her and the others. She saw the American soldiers, initially confused, now fiercely defending the women, a stark contrast to the enemy she had known. Her memories flashed, the kind words, the shared sketchbook, the unwavering respect. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of terror and something else, a fierce protective instinct born of her newfound sense of worth. She had been a victim for so long, but now, a flicker of agency ignited within her. She spotted a fallen Marine's radio, its antenna bent but seemingly intact, lying discarded near a makeshift defensive trench. Overcoming her deep-seated fear of authority figures, her ingrained impulse to remain silent and invisible, she lunged for it. Remembering the crude English phrases she'd learned and, more importantly, the crucial geographic markers taught by a sympathetic MP who had pointed out landmarks on a map days earlier, she fumbled with the dial. Her hands trembled, but her resolve was steel. Charlie 9. Danger, Japanese. Approaching west flank, 200 yards. She stammered into the crackling device, her voice raw, barely recognizable to herself. She repeated the coordinates, then described the enemy's numbers and weaponry, her memory honed by years of forced observation. Her precise, real-time intelligence about the Japanese attackers' movements, relayed by a former comfort woman, critically aided the American command in repelling the assault. The information, relayed by a seemingly insignificant civilian, allowed the American forces to regroup, flank the attacking unit, and push them back, ultimately saving countless lives, American soldiers and Japanese civilians alike. It was her monumental decision, an act of sheer will, born from her newfound trust in the courage she had rediscovered. Her act of agency, not of vengeance but of survival, solidified her path from victim to survivor, transforming her from a passive object of war into an active participant in her own destiny. She had found her voice, and it had saved lives. The Japanese attack was repelled, thanks in large part to Hana's unexpected bravery. The remnants of the desperate unit were either captured or annihilated, their final, futile charge broken. General Peterson, a stern but fair commander known for his pragmatic approach, arrived at the scene. He had heard whispers of Chaplain Hayes' unconventional methods but had reserved judgment. Now, witnessing the aftermath and hearing the reports of Hana's pivotal role, he personally commended Hayes for fostering such an unexpected alliance of trust. "Chaplain," he stated, his voice gruff but tinged with respect, "you proved that sometimes the greatest weapon isn't a gun, but a moral compass." It was a rare compliment, one that carried significant weight. The comfort women were safely relocated to a purpose-built refugee camp in a more secure area, far from the front lines. This wasn't merely another internment. It was a testament to Hayes' unwavering advocacy and the women's brave, nascent testimonies. The camp was staffed by medical and psychological personnel, a direct result of Hayes' tireless efforts to explain their unique trauma to the military command. It focused on rehabilitation and integration, providing dignified pathways forward, access to education, vocational training, and, crucially, psychological counseling. This was a stark contrast to the expected exploitation or immediate dismissal, marking a profound shift in military humanitarian response. The women, including Hana, began the long, arduous journey of rebuilding their lives, their hope nourished by the promise of a future where they were seen as whole, valuable individuals. Chaplain Hayes and Corporal Rodriguez became quiet heroes within their unit, their story informally spreading through the military ranks. Their actions inspired others, a ripple effect of compassion in a brutal conflict. Hayes, after the war, would publish a discreet but impactful account of his experiences, though never revealing the identities of the women, focusing instead on the moral imperatives of care and respect. His work would influence military chaplaincy programs for decades, subtly shifting emphasis towards humanitarian aid and intercultural understanding in future conflicts. Hana, once a silent victim, became a powerful advocate for other comfort women. She shared her testimony in international forums, her voice once a murmur, now a beacon for justice and healing. She spoke not just of her suffering, but of the unexpected kindness she had found, of the dignity that had been restored. Her story became a small, yet profound counter-narrative to the prevailing narratives of wartime brutality, a testament to empathy's enduring power, a quiet revolution in the face of overwhelming despair. 70 years later, an elderly Hana, her face lined with the wisdom of a long life lived with purpose, now a respected elder and a tireless human rights activist, addressed a UN panel on wartime atrocities. Her voice, though softer with age, still carried the resonant power of truth. She spoke not of hatred, for she had long since shed that burden, but of the transformative power of unexpected kindness. Her story, featuring the American chaplains, the men who had prayed beside them instead of exploiting them, served as a living bridge between past suffering and future hope. She ended her speech with a plea, her eyes scanning the faces of diplomats and activists. "The wounds of war are deep," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But the seeds of humanity, when planted with care, can grow into the tallest trees of understanding. We must never forget the past, but we must also never forget the capacity for grace, for it is grace that truly heals." Her words resonated, a poignant reminder to new generations that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion can emerge from the most unlikely places, urging forgiveness and reconciliation without ever forgetting the harsh lessons of history. The carved wooden bird, now carefully preserved, sat on her desk, a silent, powerful testament to her incredible journey. In the crucible of war, where the dehumanization of the enemy is paramount, it is often the most unexpected acts of grace that reveal the enduring, universal truth of our shared humanity. How do acts of compassion, even small ones, challenge our deepest biases and assumptions about others, especially those we perceive as different or enemy? If this story of unexpected empathy and human connection moved you, and you believe in shedding light on the untold stories of history, hit that subscribe button to join us as we uncover more narratives that remind us of our collective capacity for both darkness and profound light.